Welcome to Sportslov Media on YouTube. It's you guys, Sportslov. Happy New Year. We are going to be ringing in 2026, going into 2025. While we're waiting on other people to join in, let's listen to some music. But we will discuss sports. We'll ring in the new year and we'll talk more sports. So while we wait, let's just listen to some music. Again, if you're just joining me today, Happy New Year. This is the Sportslov Media Sports Palooza. We're gonna talk sports as we end 2025, and we'll ring in the new year with 2026, and we'll talk even more sports. So just bear with me. We will get started here in just a moment. All right, Happy New Year, folks. We are going to start the Sports Palooza by, first off, we're going to talk about who is going to be playing in college sports today, January 1st, 2026. We're not quite in 2026 yet, but we will be shortly. Anyway, in women's college basketball, we have the following games going on today. We have it looks like we have Central Arkansas versus somebody. Actually, you know what we're going to do? We're going to see if I can't see this a little better. Let's do it this way. Yeah, so Central Arkansas versus Stetson. We have California versus North Carolina. We have Michigan State versus Indiana. Creighton versus Villanova. Carolina University versus UNC Greensboro. We have Southern Wesleyan versus Wofford. West Virginia versus Kansas. Marquette versus Xavier. Let's see, Boston College versus Duke. You have Alabama versus South Carolina. You have Nebraska versus Iowa. You have Vanderbilt going to be playing Arkansas. Let's see. After Vanderbilt, Arkansas, we have, let's see, SMU going to be playing Louisville. Florida playing Tennessee. Valparaiso going to be playing Indiana State. Merrimack versus Rider. DePaul versus St. John's. Wisconsin versus Rutgers. Stanford versus NC State. Iona versus Quinnipiac. And this is women's basketball, by the way. We have, let's see. Okay, we have DePaul versus St. John's, Wisconsin versus Rutgers, Stanford versus NC State, Iona versus Quinnipiac, Mount St. Mary's versus Siena, Niagara versus Sacred Heart, Cal Poly versus UC San Diego, Vermont versus Vermont versus the University of Albany, Georgia State versus James Madison, Georgia Southern versus Old Dominion. Let's see, who else do we have? Sorry about the blurriness. We have South Alabama versus Florida Gulf Coast. We have Lipscomb versus North Florida. We have Southern Illinois versus SIU Edwardsville. As you can see with my picks and stuff, we have the ones that I have underlined are the ones that I have winning the game. So I have Central Arkansas beating Stetson, North Carolina defeating California, Michigan State defeating Indiana, Villanova defeating Creighton, Carolina University playing against UNC Greensboro. I have Southern Wesleyan defeating Wofford, West Virginia defeating Kansas, Marquette defeating Xavier, Boston College losing to Duke, South Carolina defeats Alabama, Iowa defeats Nebraska, Arkansas defeats Vanderbilt, Louisville defeats SMU, Florida defeats Tennessee, Valparaiso defeats Indiana State, Merrimack defeats Rider, DePaul defeats St. John's, Wisconsin will defeat Rutgers, Stanford will defeat NC State, Iona will be losing against Quinnipiac. We have Mount St. Mary's losing to Siena. We have Sacred Heart winning over Niagara. Who else do I have? I'm sorry about the blurriness. Let's see if I can't get that fixed. All right, we have UC San Diego defeating Cal Poly, University of Albany defeating Vermont, James Madison defeating Georgia State, Old Dominion defeats Georgia Southern, North Alabama defeats Florida Gulf Coast, Lipscomb defeats North Florida, Southern Indiana defeats SIU Edwardsville. Let's see. These are games that are taking place January 1st, 2026. So that will be here today. Well, it'll be January 1st, 2026. We have more games to go over here in just a moment. I'm sorry about the difficulties I'm having at the moment. So more women's action. So in this, we have Morehead State versus Lindenwood, South Alabama versus UL Monroe, Prairie View A&M versus Southern, St. Thomas and Minneapolis versus South Dakota State, Manhattan versus St. Peter's, Marshall versus Coastal Carolina, Maryland versus Illinois, Notre Dame versus Georgia Tech, North Dakota versus Denver, Tennessee Tech against Little Rock, UT Arlington versus California Baptist, Tarleton State versus Utah Valley, Abilene Christian versus Utah Tech. We have Northwestern versus Oregon, Alabama A&M versus Mississippi Valley State, UC Irvine versus Cal State Bakersfield. I'm sorry, let me get this way. All right, let's see, where did we get to? Alrighty. We have Cal State Fullerton versus UC Santa Barbara. We have Troy versus Louisiana. We have Michigan versus Washington. Wake Forest versus Pittsburgh. Miami versus Virginia Tech. Florida State versus Syracuse. New Hampshire versus Bryant. Maine versus UMass and Lowell. Eastern Illinois versus Southeast Missouri State. We have NJIT versus UMBC. West Georgia versus Eastern Kentucky. Queens University versus Bellarmine, Austin Peay versus Jacksonville, Western Illinois versus UT Martin, Alabama State versus Arkansas Pine Bluff, Clemson versus Virginia, Canisius versus Fairfield, Arkansas State versus Southern Miss, Texas versus Missouri, Georgia versus Ole Miss, Texas Southern versus Grambling, Auburn versus Mississippi State. We have Kentucky versus LSU, Oklahoma versus Texas A&M, North Dakota State versus Oral Roberts. We have Montana State versus Northern Colorado, Montana versus Northern Arizona, UC Davis versus Cal State Northridge, Idaho State versus Sacramento State, Weber State versus Portland State, UC Riverside versus Hawaii. So in those games that I just mentioned, I have Hawaii beating UC Riverside. I have Portland State defeating Weber State. I have Idaho State defeating Sacramento State. I have Cal State, Northridge losing to UC Davis. Let's see, Montana versus Northern Arizona. I have Northern Arizona winning that one. Northern Colorado over Montana State. North Dakota State loses to Oral Roberts. Let's see, Oklahoma loses to Texas, or wins to Texas A&M. Kentucky beats LSU. Auburn will defeat Mississippi State. Texas Southern will defeat Grambling. Georgia will defeat Ole Miss. Texas will defeat Missouri. Arkansas State will defeat Southern Miss. Let's see, Fairfield will beat Canisius. Clemson will defeat Virginia. Alabama State defeats Arkansas Pine Bluff. UT Martin will defeat Western Illinois. Austin Peay loses to Jacksonville. Belmarine loses to Queens University. West Georgia defeats Eastern Kentucky. NJIT defeats UMBC. Let's see, Eastern Illinois defeats Southern Missouri. Maine will defeat UMass and Lowell. I have New Hampshire defeating Bryant. Florida State defeating Syracuse. Miami and Florida defeating Virginia Tech. Wake Forest defeating Pittsburgh. Michigan defeating Washington. Troy losing to Louisiana. Let's see, Cal State Fullerton losing to UC Santa Barbara. UC Irvine will win over Cal State Bakersfield. Alabama A&M loses to Mississippi Valley State. Oregon defeats Northwestern. Utah Tech defeats Abilene Christian. California Baptist will defeat UT Arlington. Tennessee Tech loses to Little Rock. Denver will defeat North Dakota. Notre Dame will defeat Georgia Tech. Maryland will defeat Illinois. Let's see, Marshall will defeat Coastal Carolina. St. Peter's will lose to Manhattan. St. Thomas in Minnesota will lose to South Dakota State. Southern will defeat Prairie View A&M. South Alabama defeats UL Monroe. Lindenwood will defeat, who is that? Lindenwood will defeat who? Morehead State. All right, so there you have it. That's my picks for the women's basketball and everything. So we're getting very close to the start of the new year. So we're going to interrupt this broadcast right now, and we're going to put this up for just a second. We have the breaking news from Sportslov Media. 2025 is almost done, and we are going to bring in the new year with 2026. So let's get that going. I don't know what time there will be, so we're not going to have a countdown, but what we'll do is I've got something in mind that we'll do when it gets that time, which it should be very close. From Sportslov Media to your household, thank you for joining Sportslov Media on this adventure that we've had this year in 2025. It looks to be a great year coming up in 2026. We will continue the Sports Palooza here shortly, and it is now midnight. Happy New Year to each and every one of you. We will continue with the music now. Happy New Year to each and every one of you, 2026. let's continue with this Sports Palooza today. We have men's college basketball to go over now. And in this men's college basketball, all games will take place today, January 1st, 2026. We have, it looks like Samford will be playing VMB. You have Elms College playing Dartmouth. You have Oakland playing Youngstown State. You have Oakland playing Coastal Carolina. North Dakota will be playing Georgia Southern. Oral Roberts will be playing North Dakota. I think I went there already. Northern Kentucky versus IU Indianapolis. Milwaukee versus Wright State. We have Green Bay versus Purdue Fort Wayne. We have Jacksonville playing Lipscomb. Florida Gulf Coast versus Central Arkansas. And we have Valparaiso versus Southern Illinois. So on those picks, I have Valparaiso defeating Southern Illinois. I have Florida Gulf Coast defeating Central Arkansas. Jacksonville defeats Lipscomb. Purdue Fort Wayne defeats Green Bay. Milwaukee loses to Wright State. Northern Kentucky will defeat IU Indianapolis. North Dakota will defeat Oral Roberts. Coastal Carolina will defeat Georgia Southern. Oakland defeats Youngstown State. Elms College will defeat Dartmouth. And we have Samford will lose to VMI. All right. More men's basketball going on January 1st. Okay, let's see who we have here. I'm sorry if this is a little disorganized, but bear with me. We have Evansville versus Illinois State. We have Stetson versus North Alabama. Chattanooga versus UNC Greensboro. Portland State versus Weber State. We have Southern Indiana versus SIU Edwardsville. Morehead State versus Lindenwood. Of those games, I'm going to make my predictions. I have Illinois State losing to Evansville. I have Stetson beating North Alabama. UNC Greensboro wins over Chattanooga. Let's see. Weber State defeats Portland State. SIU Edwardsville defeats Southern Indiana. Morehead State defeats Lindenwood. Next, you have Tennessee Tech versus Little Rock. You have Omaha versus South Dakota State. You have Northern Arizona versus Montana. Bradley versus Belmont. Eastern Kentucky versus Queens University. Bellarmine versus West Georgia. Indiana State will play Northern Iowa. Let's see, Hawaii plays UC Riverside. North Florida will play Austin Peay. California Baptist will play UT Arlington. Utah Valley will play Tarleton State. Utah Tech will play Abilene Christian. Western Illinois will play UT Martin. Eastern Illinois will play Southern Missouri State. Murray State will play UIC. Northern Colorado will play Montana State. Sacramento State will play Idaho State. UC Santa Barbara will play Cal State Fullerton. You have, okay, I think that's all of the, yes, that is all of the men's basketball games. So, in that, we have, let's see, I have Tennessee Tech winning over Little Rock. Omaha defeats South Dakota State. Northern Arizona defeats Montana. Bradley defeats Belmont. Eastern Kentucky defeats Queens University. Bellarmine will defeat West Georgia. Indiana State will defeat Northern Iowa. Hawaii loses to UC Riverside. Austin Peay will defeat North Florida. UT Arlington will defeat California Baptist. Tarleton State will defeat Utah Valley. Abilene Christian will defeat Utah Tech. UT Martin will defeat Western Illinois. Southeastern Missouri State will defeat Eastern Illinois. Murray State will defeat UIC. Northern Colorado will defeat Montana State. Sacramento State loses to Idaho State. Cal State Fullerton defeats UC Santa Barbara. And UC San Diego will defeat Cal Poly. That's all of the men's basketball games that will take place in the college world. Now, for the NBA G League, on January 1st, you have Capital City versus, who do we have? Yeah, Capital City versus Westchester. And we have Birmingham versus College Park. Westchester will defeat Capital City. Birmingham defeats College Park. That is your NBA G League games today. Next, we will look at regular NBA games today. There's not many, but there's a few. These games will take place later today. We still have a lot of sports to talk about, so stay with me. Let's see. We have Houston versus Brooklyn. We have Detroit versus Miami. We have Philadelphia versus Dallas. We have Sacramento versus, looks like Boston. We have Utah versus Los Angeles. So in that, I have Brooklyn defeating Houston, Miami defeating Detroit, Dallas defeating Philadelphia, Boston defeating Sacramento, and Utah defeating Los Angeles. All right, next we have is the NHL hockey games today. So in those hockey games, for January 1st, we have Washington plays Ottawa. Utah plays New York. Let's see. Winnipeg versus Toronto. Pittsburgh versus Detroit. Montreal versus Carolina. Tampa Bay versus Los Angeles. Dallas versus Chicago. Nashville versus Seattle. So my picks: Nashville will defeat Seattle, Dallas defeats Chicago, Tampa Bay defeats Los Angeles, Carolina defeats Montreal, Pittsburgh loses to Detroit, Winnipeg loses to Toronto, Utah defeats New York, Washington will defeat Ottawa. So that's your NHL games for the day. Now, we're going to move on and cover a different sport now. I've got in front of me the NASCAR schedules. So I'm going to go over the 2026 NASCAR schedule for the Cup schedule, the Cup Series. In this, we have on February 1st, the Cookout Clash, which will be at Bowman Gray Stadium. Don't know how many laps it'll be. Next, you have on February 12th, you'll have the Daytona 500 duels at the Daytona International Speedway. On February 15th, you actually have the Daytona 500 at the Daytona International Speedway. It'll be 200 laps. February 22nd, you have the Ambetter Health 400, which will be at Echo Park Speedway, 260 laps. March 1st, you have the Echo Park Texas Grand Prix, which is going to be at the Circuit of the Americas, 95 laps. March 8th, you have the Straight Talk Wireless 500, which will be Phoenix Raceway and 312 laps. March 15th, you have the Pennzoil 400, which will be at the Las Vegas Motor Speedway, and that's 267 laps. The Goodyear 400 will be at Darlington Raceway. That'll be 293 laps. All right, moving on with more NASCAR. Let's see. Oh, and when I mentioned like the name of the race, that's how many miles it is. So the number of miles does not necessarily equal the number of laps. It just depends on how big the course is, on whether or not that number matches or not. So the next NASCAR race will be the Cookout 400. That'll be at Martinsville Speedway, and that'll be 400 laps. The week of April 5th, they call it the Easter Bunny 500, but there's not really anything going on that day. It's an off week. Next NASCAR race is April 12th with the Food City 500 at Bristol Motor Speedway. That'll be 500 laps. April 19th, you have the Advent Health 400 at Kansas Speedway. That's 267 laps. On April 26th, you have the Jack Links 500 at the Talladega Superspeedway. That'll be 188 laps. May 3rd, you have the Worth 400, which will be at Texas Motor Speedway, 267 laps. You have the Go Bowling at the Glen on May 10th, Watkins Glen International, 90 laps. Let's see. May 17th, you have the All-Star Open, which will be at Dover Motorsport Speedway. Then you'll have the All-Star Race, May 17th, at the Dover Motor Speedway. I'm not sure of how many laps it'll be. May 24th will be the Coca-Cola 600. That'll be at Charlotte Motor Speedway, and that'll be 300 or 400 laps. We're not sure which, but oh, wait. That one will be 100, 200, 300, and 400 laps. So there'll be 4 different races with that. Let's see. Next, on May 31st, you'll have the Cracker Barrel 400, which will be at the Nashville Superspeedway, and 300 laps. June 7th, you'll have the Firekeepers Casino 400 at the Michigan International Speedway with 200 laps. Then you have, on June 14th, the Great American Getaway 400, which will be at Pocono Raceway, and that'll be 160 laps. Next, you have the Enduro 250 Race the Base, Naval Base Coronado. Not sure how many laps it'll be. Excuse me. On June 28th, you have the Toyota Save Mart 350 at Sonoma Raceway, which will be 110 laps. July 5th will be a TBA situation 400, Chicagoland Speedway with 267 laps. July 12th, you have the Quaker State 400, which will be at the Echo Park Speedway, 260 laps. July 19th, you'll have the Window World 450, which will be at the North Wilkesboro Speedway. That's to be announced in terms of how many laps that'll be. Next, you'll have sorry about that. Then you'll have the Brickyard 400 on July 26th, and that will be at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, 160 laps. All right, more NASCAR stuff. All right, on August 2nd, you'll have the Summer Break 400. Oh, wait, that's not a real thing. That's an off week. On August 9th, you'll have the Iowa Corn 350 at Iowa Speedway with 350 laps. Let's see. August 15th, you have the Cookout 400 and Richmond Raceway, which will be 400 laps. August 23rd, you have the USA Today 301, which will be at New Hampshire Motor Speedway, and you'll have 301 laps. August 29th, you'll have the Coke Zero Sugar 400 at the Daytona International Speedway, 160 laps. At this point will be the playoffs, and that'll start the round of 16. That'll be 3 races. First of the races will be the Cookout Southern 500 on September 6th at Darlington Raceway, 367 laps. You have next will be the Enjoy Illinois 300 at Worldwide Technology Raceway, 240 laps, and that's on September 13th. On September 19th, you have the Bass Pro Shops night race at Bristol Motor Speedway, and that'll be 500 laps. Then you enter the round of 12, which will be 3 weeks. On the 27th of September, you have the Hollywood Casino 400 at Kansas Speedway, 267 laps. October 4th, you have the South Point 400, Las Vegas Motor Speedway, 267 laps. October 11th, you have the Bank of America Roval, 400, Charlotte Motor Speedway Roval, and you'll have 109 laps. Then in the playoffs, you'll enter the round of 8 for NASCAR. There's a to be announced race on the 18th, and that's going to be Phoenix Raceway, 312 laps. On October 25th, you'll have the Yellowwood 500, which will be at Talladega Superspeedway, 188 laps. November 1st, you have the Xfinity 500, which will be at Martinsville Speedway, 500 laps. The NASCAR Cup Series Championship will be November 8th, and that'll be at Homestead Miami Speedway, 267 laps. That's your NASCAR Sprint Cup racing thing. Now, we will look at the O'Reilly Auto Parts series, which that used to be like the Nationwide or some other stuff. So, in that, you have February 14th, the United Rentals 300. That'll be at Daytona International Speedway. Not sure how many laps it's going to be, and I'm not sure how many laps each of these will be, so I'll just read what I have. On February 21st, you'll have the Bennett Transportation and Logistics 250 at the Echo Park Speedway. February 28th, you'll have the Focused Health 250 at the Circuit of the Americas. You have on March 7th the Go VX 200. That'll be at Phoenix Raceway. Let's see. March 14th will be the Liuna NASCAR Xfinity Series, Las Vegas Motor Speedway. On March 21st, you'll have the Sports Clips Haircuts VFW Help a Hero 200. That'll be at Darlington Raceway. On March 28th, you have the Marine Corps 250, which will be at Martinsville Speedway. All right, more racing stuff to talk about. Yes, I mentioned we're going through a lot in the Sports Palooza, but just stay with me. All right, so next in that series, you have the North Carolina Education Lottery 250, which will be in Rockingham Speedway. On April 11th, you have the SciApps 300, which will be at Bristol Motor Speedway. On April 18th, you have the Kansas Lottery 300, which will be at Kansas Speedway. On April 25th, you have the Ag Pro 300, which will be at Talladega Superspeedway. May 2nd, you'll have the Andy's Frozen Custard 300 at Texas Motor Speedway. May 9th, you have the Mission 200 at the Glen, at Watkins Glen International. May 16th, you have the Bet Rivers 200, which will be at Dover Motor Speedway. May 23rd, you have the Bet MGM 300, which will be at Charlotte Motor Speedway. May 30th, you have the Tennessee Lottery 250 at the Nashville Super Speedway. There'll be an off week on June 6th. On June 13th, you have the Explore the Pocono Mountains 250 at the Pocono Raceway. I'm not sure of the name of the race on June 20th, but it will be at the Naval Base in Coronado. June 27th, you have the Pit Boss Food Max 250 at Sonoma Raceway. July 4th, not available on that information, but it will be at Chicagoland Speedway. Let's see, July 11th, you have the Focused Health 250, which will be at Echo Park Speedway. You'll have an off week on July 18th. Let's see. On July 25th, you'll have the Pennzoil 250, which will be at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. August 1st is an off week. August 8th will be the Hy-Vee Parks 250. That'll be at the Iowa Super Speedway. On August 15th is an off week. All right, moving on with NASCAR. We're still talking NASCAR. Let's see. On August 22nd, it'll be an off week. August 28th will be the Wawa 250 at Daytona International Speedway. September 5th, not sure what the race is going to be called, but it will be held at Darlington Raceway. September 12th will be the New Way 200 Sauced by Blues Hog Worldwide Technology Raceway. The playoffs begin with the round of 12 after that. September 18th, you have the Food City 300 at Bristol Motor Speedway. You'll have an off week, September 26th. October 3rd, you have the Focused Health 302, Las Vegas Motor Speedway. October 10th, you have the Blue Cross North Carolina 250 at Charlotte Motor Speedway, Roval. Excuse me. You'll have the round of 8 at that point. Not sure what it's going to be called, but on October 17th, you have a race at the Phoenix Raceway. October 24th, you'll have the United Rentals 250, which will be at the Talladega Superspeedway. On October 31st, you have the IAA and Ritchie Brothers 250, which will be at Martinsville Speedway. The championship race will be the O'Reilly Auto Parts Series Championship on November 7th, and that will be at the Homestead Miami Speedway. Next, we will look at the NASCAR Truck Series schedule. I do have that, so let's look at it. On February 13th, you have the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series at Daytona at the Daytona International Speedway. On February 21st, you have the FR8 Racing 208 at Echo Park Speedway. February 28th, you have the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series race at St. Petersburg, which is the Grand Prix of St. Petersburg. March 20th, you'll have the Truck Series at Darlington Raceway. April 3rd, you'll have the Truck Series race at Rockingham Speedway. April 10th, you'll have the Truck Series race at Bristol Motor Speedway. On May 1st, you have the SpeedyCash.com 250, which will be at the Texas Motor Speedway. All right, more Truck Series racing. You'll have, what's next? May 8th, you'll have the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series race at Watkins Glen at the Watkins Glen International Track. May 22nd, you have the North Carolina Education Lottery 200 at Charlotte Motor Speedway. Then you have on the 29th of May, the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series race at Nashville at the Nashville Super Speedway. Excuse me. June 6th, you'll have the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series race at Michigan International Speedway. June 19th, you have the NASCAR Truck Series race at San Diego, and it'll be a San Diego street race. On July 11th, the Truck Series will be at Lime Rock Park. July 18th is the Window World 250, North Wilkesboro Speedway. You have the Craftsman Truck Series race at IRP on July 24th, and that'll be at the Lucas Oil Indianapolis Raceway Park. August 14th, you have the Truck Series race at Richmond Raceway. August 22nd, you have the Team EJP 175, which will be held in New Hampshire. All right, so let's see what we have here. September 17th, we will have the UNOH 200 presented by Ohio Logistics at Bristol Motor Speedway. September 26th, you have the Truck Series playoff race at Kansas Speedway. October 9th will be another playoff race at the Charlotte Motor Speedway, Roval. October 16th is the playoff race at the Phoenix Raceway. October 23rd will be the playoff race at Talladega at the Talladega Super Speedway. October 30th will be another playoff thing for the Craftsman Truck Series in Martinsville at Martinsville Speedway. November 6th will be the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series Championship race. That'll be held at the Homestead in Miami, Florida at the Miami Speedway. So, let's see. Do I need these truck rules? No, do not need these. All right, so now let's look at the calendar for F1 or Formula One. Formula One is another form of racing, and we'll talk about their schedule. For Formula One, Let's see. It looks like March 5th through 7th at the Qatar Airways Australian GP at the Melbourne Grand Prix Circuit. March 12th through 14th, you have the Heineken Chinese Grand Prix at the Shanghai International Circuit. March 26th through 28th, it looks like you have the Aramco Japanese Grand Prix at Suzuki International Racing Course. April 9th through 11th, it looks like the Gulf Air Bahrain Grand Prix at Bahrain International Circuit. April 16th through 18th, you have the STC Saudi Arabian Grand Prix, Jeddah Street Circuit. April 30th through May 2nd, you have the Crypto.com Miami Grand Prix at the, from the Miami International Autodrome. Let's see, what is this? May 21st through 23rd, you have the Lenovo Canadian Grand Prix Circuit Giles v. Villeneuve. June 4th through 6th will be the Monaco Grand Prix Circuit de Monaco. June 11th through 13th, you have the MSC Cruises Barcelona Catalunya Grand Prix at Circuit de Catalunya. June 25th through 27th, it looks like Lenovo Australian Grand Prix at the Red Bull Ring. July 2nd through 4th is the Pirelli British Grand Prix at Silverstone Circuit. July 16th through 18th is the Belgian Grand Prix at the Circuit de Spa Francorchamps. July 23rd to 25th, you have the AWS Hungarian Grand Prix in Hungaroring. August 20th through 22nd, you have the Heineken Duluth, or the Heineken Dutch Grand Prix at Circuit Park Zandvoort. September 3rd through 5th, it will be the Pirelli Italian Grand Prix at the Autodromo Nazionale Manuzza. September 10th through 12th will be the Tag Heuser Spanish Grand Prix in Madrid. September 23rd through 25th will be the Qatar Airways Azerbaijan Grand Prix at the Baku City Circuit. October 8th through 10th will be the Singapore Airlines Singapore Grand Prix at the Marina Bay Street Circuit. October 22nd through 24th, we have the MSC Cruises Limited States Grand Prix Circuit of the Americas. And then October 29th through November 1st, we have the Mexico City Grand Prix at the Autodromo Armonius Rodriguez area. So there's your there's a couple other Formula One races. So I'll get to that. The other Formula One races this year will be November 5th through 7th. And that will be the MSC Cruises Sao Paulo Grand Prix, the Autodromo Jose Carlos Place. Then you have November 18th through 20th, which will be the Heineken Las Vegas Grand Prix at the Las Vegas Street Circuit. November 26th through 28th will be the Qatar Airways Qatar Grand Prix, Losail International Circuit. And December 3rd through 5th will be the Etihad Airways Abu Dhabi Grand Prix at the Yas Marina Circuit. That's your Formula One race schedule. Now, let's see. The 2026 Winter Olympics will be held in Milan, Cortina in Italy. This event will take place February 4th through 22nd of 2026. Competition will begin a couple of days before opening ceremonies. Here's a rundown of competition each day. February 4th, 2026, we'll have alpine skiing, curling, and luge. February 5th, we'll have alpine skiing, curling, ice hockey, luge, ski jumping, and snowboard. February 6th, alpine skiing, curling, ice hockey, luge, ski jumping, opening ceremonies, figure skating. After opening ceremonies, here's what all the other sports will look like based upon men and women competing. You'll have alpine skiing from February 7th through 12th, 14th through 16th, and 18th. The biathlon, February 8th, 10th through 11th, 13th through 15th, 17th through 18th, 20th through 21st. Bobsleigh will be February 12th through 22nd. Cross-country skiing, February 7th through 8th, the 10th, 12th through 15th, 18th, and 21st through 22nd. Curling will continue February 7th through 22nd. Figure skating will continue February 7th through 11th, the 13th, the 15th through 17th, and 19th. Freestyle skiing February 7th, 9th through 12th, 14th through 21. Ice hockey will continue every day February 7th through 22nd. Luge will continue February 7th through 12th. Nordic combined will be February 9th through 11th, the 13th, and the 15th through 19th. Short track speed skating will be February 10th, 12th, 14th, 16th, 18th, and 20th. Skeleton will be February 9th through 15th. Ski jumping will continue February 7th through 10th, and then 12th through 16th. Ski mountaineering February 19th and 21st. Snowboarding will continue February 7th through 9th, 11th through 13th, 15th through 18th. Speed skating will be February 7th through 9th, 11th through 15th, the 17th, 19th through 21st. Excuse me. The closing ceremonies will be February 22nd of 2025. To break this down further, there'll be 16 sports or disciplines with 116 medal events, 50 women's, 54 men's events, and 12 mixed gender or co-ed events. The 2026 Paralympics will also be in Milano Cortina, Italy. That'll take place March 6th through 15th of 2025. In the Paralympics, it'll feature 6 sports. Those 6 sports will be para-alpine skiing, para-biathlon, para-cross-country skiing, para-ice hockey or sled hockey, para-snowboard, and wheelchair curling. Wheelchair curling will be March 4th through 6th to start with. The opening ceremony will be March 6th. Here's the list of events by day after that. Wheelchair curling will be March 7th through 14th. Para snowboard will be March 7th through 8th and 14th. Para ice hockey will be March 7th, 9th through 10th, and 12th through 15th. Para cross country skiing March 8th, 11th, 14th through 15th. Para biathlon March 7th, 10th, and 13th. Para alpine skiing March 7th, 9th through 10th, and 12th through 15th. The closing ceremony will be March 15th. There'll be 76 total medal events over 79. There'll be 79 medal events. So we have that. All right. Now I'm going to not do this one because I might have a hard time reading it. No. All right, so we move on to some conference football scheduling. And let's see. For Big Ten football, what I'm going to do is I'm going to read each team and who they will be playing home and away. And I will do that each year, 2026 through 2028, based on what I have here. So, in 2026, home for, let's see, we're going to go with Illinois. Let's see, what's home and what's away. Away games for Illinois will be Maryland, Michigan State, Northwestern, Ohio State, UCLA. Home games will be Iowa, Nebraska, Oregon, and Purdue. And I think we're just going to go for 2026 on these. For Indiana, you have Michigan, Nebraska, Rutgers, Washington away. And you have Minnesota, Northwestern, Ohio State, Purdue, and USC away. Yeah, we're just going to do 2026 on this one. So I'm having trouble reading that. You know what? We're going to skip the Big Ten. You can go to the Big Ten website, get the information on that. But they will be playing. They have a schedule that's kind of set up a little bit unique and different. Go to the Big Ten website if you want more information regarding that. I'm having trouble reading my notes. Sorry about that. So next, we will look at the Big 12 football schedule for 2026 and 2027. So we'll look at the team and, yeah, we'll just do it that way. Yeah. So in 2026, Arizona will be playing BYU, Texas Tech, Kansas State, West Virginia away, Arizona State, Utah, TCU, Iowa State, and Cincinnati at home. And then in 2027, it'll be Arizona State, Utah, Baylor, Oklahoma State, Kansas University away. Let's see, it'll be Colorado, Houston, Kansas State, UCF, home in 2027, and that's for Arizona. Arizona State in 2026 will be playing Arizona, BYU, Texas Tech, Kansas University, UCF away, Colorado, Baylor, Oklahoma State, Kansas State at home. In 2027, away will be Colorado, TCU, Houston, and West Virginia. Home will be Arizona, BYU, Utah, Iowa State, and I'm trying to think, Cincinnati. All right, so, alrighty. All right, let's look at BYU 2026. They're going to be doing Utah, TCU, Kansas. I've already done that one. All right, so Utah in 2026 will play Arizona, Colorado, TCU, Iowa State, and Cincinnati away. And BYU, Houston, Kansas, and West Virginia at home. In 2027, they'll have Arizona State, BYU, Texas Tech, Kansas State away, and Arizona, Baylor, TCU, Oklahoma State, and UCF at home. Next, we will look at Colorado. In 2026, they will have Arizona State, Baylor, Oklahoma State, Cincinnati, and that will be away. Utah, Texas Tech, Houston, Kansas State, UCF at home. And in 2027, they'll have away Arizona, BYU, Houston, Iowa State, UCF, and at home they will have Arizona State, TCU, Kansas, and West Virginia. Next is Texas Tech. In 2026, they will play away. Let's see, Texas Tech. Let me make sure. Yeah, Texas Tech away. Colorado, Baylor, Oklahoma State, Cincinnati. At home will be Arizona State, TCU, Houston, West Virginia. In 2027, away games will be BYU, TCU, Houston, Kansas, UCF. Home games will be Utah, Baylor, Kansas State, and Iowa State. Next is Baylor. In 2026, away, Arizona State, BYU, Houston, Kansas, UCF. Home games will be Colorado, Texas Tech, TCU, Iowa State. In 2027, away games, Utah, Texas Tech, TCU, Kansas State. Home games will be Arizona, Oklahoma State, Cincinnati, West Virginia, and UCF. All right, we have TCU. Away games, Arizona, Texas Tech, Baylor, UCF. Home games, BYU, Utah, Kansas, Kansas State, West Virginia. 2027 will be Utah, Colorado, Oklahoma State, Iowa State, Cincinnati. Home games will be Arizona State, Texas Tech, Baylor, and Houston. Okay, let's see. Houston, away, will play Utah, Colorado, Texas Tech, Kansas State, West Virginia. Home will be Baylor, Oklahoma State, Cincinnati, UCF. 2027, Arizona, TCU, Iowa State, Cincinnati, away. Arizona State, BYU, Colorado, Texas Tech, and Kansas, home. Okay, Kansas will play away Utah, TCU, OSU, KSU, West Virginia. Home games will be Arizona State, BYU, Baylor, UCF. In 2027, away games BYU, Colorado, Houston, Cincinnati. Home games Arizona, Texas Tech, Oklahoma State, Kansas State, and Iowa State. Kansas State, away games in 2026, Arizona State, Colorado, TCU, Iowa State, Cincinnati. Home games Arizona, Houston, Oklahoma State, Kansas. 2027, Arizona, Texas Tech, Kansas, and UCF away. Home games will be BYU, Utah, Baylor, Cincinnati, and West Virginia. Iowa State, home or away games will be, let's see, go back up to Iowa State. Away games, Arizona, BYU, Baylor, UCF. Home games, Utah, Oklahoma State, Kansas State, Cincinnati, West Virginia. In 2027, Arizona State, Texas Tech, Oklahoma State, Kansas, and West Virginia will be away. Colorado, TCU, Houston, UCF will be home for them. For Cincinnati, in 2026, away games, Arizona, BYU, Houston, Iowa State, West Virginia. Home games with Utah, Colorado, Texas Tech, and Kansas State. In 2027, it'll be away games, Arizona State, Baylor, Kansas State, and UCF. Home games will be TCU, Houston, OSU, or Oklahoma State, Kansas University, West Virginia. For West Virginia, your away games will be Utah, Texas Tech, TCU, Iowa State. Home games will be Arizona, Houston, Oklahoma State, Kansas, and Cincinnati. In 2027, it'll be away games, Colorado, Baylor, Oklahoma State, Kansas State, Cincinnati. Home games will be Arizona State, BYU, Iowa State, UCF. All right, next will be UCF. In 2026, their away games will be Colorado, Houston, Oklahoma State, Kansas. Home games will be Arizona State, BYU, Baylor, TCU, and Iowa State. In 2027, you'll have Arizona for the away games, You'll have Arizona, Utah, Baylor, Iowa State, West Virginia. Home games will be Colorado, Texas Tech, Kansas State, and Cincinnati. All right. Now, let's see what we have here. This is the 2026-2027 schedules for football schedules for the Atlantic Coast Conference, or ACC. They unveiled their 2026 football league opponents for all 17 teams in transition to 9-game conference schedule and a minimum of 10 games each year against Power 4 opponents. Beginning in 2026, the ACC will introduce a new schedule structure for a transitional season designed to balance competitive equity, honor existing non-conference game contracts, and account for the league unique 17-team format. 12 teams will play a 9+1 schedule, 9 ACC games plus at least one Power 4 non-conference opponent, while 5 teams will play 8+2 schedule, 8 ACC games, paired with at least 2 Power 4 non-conference matchups. Starting in 2027, 16 teams will play a 9-game ACC schedule annually, with one team each season playing only 8 league games and schedule 2 Power 4 opponents outside the conference to accommodate a 10 Power 4 games requirement. The transition year 2026 serves as the bridge between the previous 8-game ACC slate and the new 9-game structure. 12 teams will play 9 ACC games and 5 will play 8 ACC games due to contractual obligations and scheduling balance. Each program must play a minimum of 10 Power 4 opponents annually, 9 ACC plus 1 non-conference Power 4, or 8 ACC plus 2 non-conference Power 4. Aligns with ACC with all other Power 4 conferences. With the 17 playing rotating members, rotating opponents ensures competitive balance over multi-year cycles. Not every team will play 9 ACC opponents every season. Teams with a 9-game ACC slate in 2026 will be California, where they'll play Clemson, Pitt, Stanford, Virginia Tech, Wake Forest at home, NC State, SMU, Syracuse, and Virginia away. For Duke, they'll play Boston College, Clemson, North Carolina, and Stanford at home. Away, they'll play Georgia Tech, Miami, NC State, Virginia, Wake Forest. Louisville, for home, will have Florida State, Pitt, SMU, Stanford, and Wake Forest. Away will be Georgia Tech, North Carolina, NC State, and Syracuse. Miami will have at home Boston College, Duke, Florida State, Pitt, Virginia Tech. The away games will be Clemson, North Carolina, Stanford, and Wake Forest. For NC State, they will play at home California, Duke, Louisville, Syracuse, Wake Forest. Away will be Florida State, North Carolina, Stanford, Virginia, and they'll be playing that football game in Brazil. Pittsburgh will have their home games: Florida State, Georgia Tech, North Carolina, Syracuse. The away games will be Boston College, California, Louisville, Miami, and Virginia Tech. SMU home games will be conference games will be Boston College, California, Virginia, Virginia Tech, and Wake Forest. The away games will be Florida State, Louisville, Stanford, and Syracuse. Stanford, their home games include Georgia Tech, Miami, NC State, and SMU. The away games will be California, Duke, Louisville, Virginia Tech, and Wake Forest. Syracuse home games will be California, Clemson, Louisville, SMU. The away games in conference will be Boston College, North Carolina, NC State, Pitt, and Virginia. For Virginia, you'll have home games California, Duke, North Carolina, NC State, and Syracuse. The away games will be Florida State, SMU, Virginia Tech, and Wake Forest. For Virginia Tech, the home conference games will be Georgia Tech, Pitt, Stanford, and Virginia. The away games will be Boston College, California, Clemson, Miami, and SMU. For Wake Forest, you'll have Duke, Miami, Stanford, Virginia. The away games will be California, Georgia Tech, Louisville, NC State, and SMU. Teams with an eight-game schedule for ACC in 2026 include Boston College. Their home games with Florida State, Pitt, Syracuse, Virginia Tech. The away games with Duke, Georgia Tech, Miami, and SMU. Clemson home schedule will be Georgia Tech, Miami, North Carolina, Virginia Tech. The away games will be California, Duke, Florida State, and Syracuse. For Florida State, the home conference schedule will be Clemson, NC State, SMU, and Virginia. The away games with Boston College, Louisville, Miami, and Pitt. Georgia Tech will have their home games against Boston College, Duke, or Wake Forest. The away games will be Clemson, Pitt, Stanford, Virginia Tech. North Carolina will have their home games versus Louisville, Miami, NC State, and Syracuse. The away games will be Clemson, Duke, Pitt, and Virginia. So that's your ACC stuff. We're continuing on in this journey. We'll next go to the Southeastern Conference. In the Southeastern Conference, it's a little bit more detailed than that. So basically, each opponent or each conference is required to have 9 conference games each year within the Southeastern Conference. So let's go into this. Basically, the Southeastern Conference has their schedule of who their opponents are going to be during the 2026 through 2029 college football season. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to name the team, I'll tell you the year, and who their conference opponents will be. Now, that's going to change. Also, in the Southeastern Conference, each team will have 3 regular teams they will play every year in the conference. So that is included in this list. For Alabama, in the annual opponents are going to be Auburn, Tennessee, and Mississippi State. In 2026, the opponents for Alabama will be Auburn, Mississippi State, Tennessee, Georgia, South Carolina, Texas A&M, Kentucky, LSU, Vanderbilt. 2027 opponents, Auburn, Mississippi State, Tennessee, Florida, Missouri, Texas, Arkansas, Ole Miss, Oklahoma. 2028 will be at home versus Auburn, at Mississippi State, at Tennessee, home versus Kentucky, home versus LSU, home versus Vanderbilt, at Georgia, at South Carolina, at Texas A&M. For 2029, Alabama will be at Auburn, home versus Mississippi State, home versus Tennessee, home versus Arkansas, home versus Ole Miss, home versus Oklahoma, at Florida, at Missouri, at Texas. Excuse me. All right, moving on. Arkansas's annual opponents are going to be LSU, Texas, and Missouri. In 2026, will be home versus LSU, home versus Missouri, at Texas versus. So if I say versus, that's going to be home. If I say at, that's going to be away. So we'll just do it that way. Versus Georgia, versus South Carolina, versus Tennessee, at Auburn, at Texas A&M, at Vanderbilt. So again, if I say versus, that means home. If I say at, that means that's where they're playing at. 2027 opponents, at LSU, at Missouri, versus Texas, versus Alabama, versus Kentucky, versus Ole Miss, at Florida, at Mississippi State, at Oklahoma. 2028 opponents, versus LSU, versus Missouri, at Texas, versus Auburn, versus Texas A&M, versus Vanderbilt, at Georgia, at South Carolina, at Tennessee. 2029 opponents at LSU, at Missouri, versus Texas, versus Florida, versus Mississippi State, versus Oklahoma, at Alabama, at Kentucky, at Ole Miss. Next you have is the Auburn Tigers. Their annual opponents will be Alabama, Georgia, and Vanderbilt. In 2026, versus Vanderbilt, at Alabama, at Georgia, versus Arkansas, versus Florida, versus LSU, at Ole Miss, at Mississippi State, at Tennessee. 2027 opponents at Vanderbilt versus Alabama versus Georgia versus South Carolina versus Texas A&M versus Oklahoma, at Kentucky, at Missouri, at Texas. 2028 opponents versus Vanderbilt, at Alabama, at Georgia versus Ole Miss, versus Mississippi State versus Tennessee, at Arkansas, at Florida versus LSU. 2029 opponents at Vanderbilt versus Alabama versus Georgia versus Kentucky versus Missouri versus Texas, at South Carolina, at Texas A&M, at Oklahoma. Alrighty. Next is the Florida Gators. Their annual opponents will be Georgia, Kentucky, South Carolina. 2026 opponents versus South Carolina versus Georgia in Atlanta, or at Kentucky versus Ole Miss versus Vanderbilt versus Oklahoma, at Auburn, at Missouri, at Texas. 2027 opponents at South Carolina versus Georgia in Tampa, Florida versus Kentucky versus Arkansas. LSU versus Texas A&M, at Alabama, at Mississippi State, at Tennessee. The 2028 opponents versus South Carolina versus Georgia in Jacksonville, at Kentucky. Looks like versus Auburn versus Missouri versus Texas, at Ole Miss, at Vanderbilt, at Oklahoma. The 2029 opponents at South Carolina versus Georgia in Jacksonville versus Kentucky versus Alabama versus Mississippi State versus Tennessee, at Arkansas, at LSU, at Texas A&M. All right, so next we have Georgia. We have Georgia next. Georgia's annual opponents will be Auburn, Florida, and South Carolina. 2026 opponents versus Auburn versus Florida in Atlanta, at South Carolina versus Missouri versus Vanderbilt versus Oklahoma, at Alabama, at Arkansas, at Ole Miss. Next, you have the 2027 opponents, which will be at Auburn, at Florida, in Tampa versus South Carolina versus LSU versus Mississippi State versus Tennessee, at Kentucky, at Texas A&M, at Texas. 2028 opponents versus Auburn versus Florida in Jacksonville, at South Carolina versus Alabama versus Arkansas versus Ole Miss, at Missouri, at Vanderbilt, at Oklahoma. 2029 opponent at Auburn versus Florida in Jacksonville versus South Carolina versus Kentucky versus Texas A&M versus Texas, at LSU, at Mississippi State, at Tennessee. All right, give me just a moment. Got to adjust here. All right, Kentucky. Annual opponents will be Florida, South Carolina, and Tennessee. 2026 opponents versus Florida, at South Carolina, at Tennessee, versus Alabama, versus LSU, versus Vanderbilt, at Missouri, at Texas A&M, at Oklahoma. 2027 opponents, at Florida, versus South Carolina, versus Tennessee, versus Auburn, versus Georgia, versus Mississippi State, at Arkansas, at Ole Miss, at Texas. 2028 opponents versus Florida, at South Carolina, at Tennessee, versus Missouri, versus Texas A&M, versus Oklahoma, at Alabama, at LSU, at Vanderbilt. 2029 opponents, at Florida, versus South Carolina, versus Tennessee, versus Arkansas, versus Ole Miss, versus Texas, at Auburn, at Georgia, at Mississippi State. Next is LSU. LSU is a fun group. LSU, you have the annual opponents, which will be Ole Miss, Texas A&M, Arkansas. The 2026 opponents will be versus Texas A&M, at Arkansas, at Ole Miss, versus Alabama, versus Mississippi State, versus Texas, at Auburn, at Kentucky, at Tennessee. 2027 opponents, at Texas A&M, versus Arkansas, versus Ole Miss, versus Missouri, versus Vanderbilt, versus Oklahoma, at Florida, at Georgia, at South Carolina. The 2028 opponents versus Texas A&M, at Arkansas, at Ole Miss, versus Auburn, versus Kentucky, versus Tennessee, at Alabama, at Mississippi State, at Texas. The 2029 opponents, at Texas A&M, versus Arkansas, versus Ole Miss, versus Florida, versus Georgia, versus South Carolina, at Missouri, at Vanderbilt, at Oklahoma. Mississippi State, their annual opponents will be Alabama, Ole Miss, and Vanderbilt. 2026 opponents versus Alabama, versus Vanderbilt, at Ole Miss, versus Auburn, versus Missouri, versus Oklahoma, at LSU, at South Carolina, at Texas. 2027 opponents, at Alabama, at Vanderbilt, versus Ole Miss, versus Arkansas, versus Florida, versus Texas A&M, at Georgia, at Kentucky, at Tennessee. 2028 opponents versus Alabama, versus Vanderbilt, at Ole Miss, versus LSU, versus South Carolina, versus Texas, at Auburn, at Missouri, at Oklahoma. 2029 opponents, at Alabama, at Vanderbilt, versus Ole Miss, versus Georgia, versus Kentucky, versus Tennessee, at Arkansas, at Florida, at Texas A&M. Next we have is Missouri. Missouri is a fun group too. Their annual opponents for Missouri will be Arkansas, Oklahoma, and Texas A&M. In 2026, they will be versus Texas A&M, versus Oklahoma, at Arkansas, versus Florida, versus Kentucky. Let's see. Versus Texas, at Georgia, at Ole Miss, at Mississippi State. 2027 opponents, at Texas A&M, at Oklahoma, versus Arkansas, versus Auburn, versus Tennessee, versus Vanderbilt, at Alabama, at LSU, at South Carolina. 2028 opponents versus Texas A&M, versus Oklahoma, at Arkansas, versus Georgia, versus Ole Miss, versus Mississippi State, at Florida, at Kentucky, at Texas. 2029 opponents, and these are just conference opponents for the Southeastern Conference. 2029 opponents, at Texas A&M, at Oklahoma, versus Arkansas, versus Alabama, versus LSU, versus South Carolina, at Auburn, at Tennessee, at Vanderbilt. Next is Oklahoma. Annual opponents will be Missouri, Ole Miss, and Texas. Let's see, 2026 opponents versus Texas in Dallas versus Ole Miss at Missouri versus Kentucky versus South Carolina versus Texas A&M at Florida, at Georgia, at Mississippi. I believe that's Ole Miss. That might be Mississippi State. So 2027 opponents at Texas and Dallas, at Ole Miss versus Missouri versus Alabama versus Arkansas versus Tennessee, at Auburn, at LSU, at Vanderbilt. 2028 opponents versus Texas and Dallas versus Ole Miss, at Missouri versus Florida versus Georgia versus Mississippi State, at Kentucky, at South Carolina, at Texas A&M. 2029 opponents versus Texas in Dallas, at Ole Miss versus Missouri versus Auburn versus LSU versus Vanderbilt, at Alabama, at Arkansas, at Tennessee. Next is Ole Miss. Their annual opponents will be LSU, Mississippi State, and Oklahoma. 2026 opponents will be versus LSU versus Mississippi State, at Oklahoma versus Auburn versus Georgia versus Missouri, at Florida, at Vanderbilt, at Texas. 2027 opponents at LSU, at Mississippi State versus Oklahoma versus Alabama versus Kentucky versus South Carolina, at Arkansas, at Tennessee, at Texas A&M. 2028 opponents versus LSU versus Mississippi State, at Oklahoma versus Florida versus Vanderbilt versus Texas, at Auburn, at Georgia, at Missouri. 2029 opponents at LSU, at Mississippi State versus Oklahoma versus Arkansas versus Tennessee versus Texas A&M, at Alabama, at Kentucky, at South Carolina. All right, next we have South Carolina. Their annual opponents will be Georgia, Florida, and Kentucky. 2026 opponents versus Georgia versus Kentucky, at Florida versus Mississippi State versus Tennessee versus Texas A&M, at Alabama, at Arkansas, at Oklahoma. 2027 opponents at Georgia, at Kentucky versus Florida versus LSU versus Missouri versus Texas, at Auburn, at Ole Miss, at Vanderbilt. 2028 opponents versus Georgia versus Kentucky, at Florida versus Alabama versus Arkansas versus Oklahoma, at Mississippi State, at Tennessee, at Texas A&M. 2029 opponents at Georgia, at Kentucky versus Florida versus Auburn versus Ole Miss versus Vanderbilt, at LSU, at Missouri, at Texas. Now, we have the Tennessee. We have Tennessee. The annual opponents will be Alabama, Kentucky, and Vanderbilt. 2026 opponents versus Alabama versus Kentucky versus Vanderbilt versus Auburn versus LSU versus Texas, at Arkansas, at South Carolina, at Texas A&M. The 2027 opponents at Alabama, at Kentucky versus Vanderbilt versus Florida versus Ole Miss. Versus Mississippi State, at Georgia, at Missouri, at Oklahoma. Next, we have the 2028 opponents, which will be versus Alabama, at Kentucky, at Vanderbilt versus Arkansas versus South Carolina. Versus Texas A&M, at Auburn, at LSU, at Texas. The 2029 opponents will be at Alabama versus Kentucky versus Vanderbilt versus Georgia versus Missouri versus Oklahoma, at Florida, at Ole Miss, at Mississippi State. Next, you have Texas, like the regular Texas team. The annual opponents will be Arkansas, Oklahoma, Texas A&M. You have the 2026 opponents, which will be versus Arkansas at Texas A&M, versus Oklahoma in Dallas, versus Florida, versus Ole Miss, versus Mississippi State, at LSU, at Missouri, at Tennessee. The 2027 opponents will be at Arkansas versus Texas A&M versus Oklahoma in Dallas versus Auburn versus Georgia versus Kentucky, at Alabama, at South Carolina, and at Vanderbilt. The 2028 opponents are going to be versus Arkansas, at Texas A&M versus Oklahoma in Dallas versus LSU, versus Missouri, versus Tennessee, at Florida, at Ole Miss, at Mississippi State. The 2029 opponents will be at Arkansas versus Texas A&M versus Oklahoma in Dallas versus Alabama versus South Carolina versus Vanderbilt, at Auburn, at Georgia, and at Kentucky. Next, you have Texas A&M. The annual opponents will be LSU, Missouri, and Texas. The 2026 opponents will be versus Texas, at LSU, at Missouri, versus Arkansas, versus Kentucky, versus Tennessee, at Alabama, at South Carolina, at Oklahoma. The 2027 opponents, at Texas, versus LSU, versus Missouri, versus Georgia, versus Ole Miss, versus Vanderbilt, at Auburn, at Florida, at Mississippi State. The 2028 opponents versus Texas, at LSU, at Missouri, versus Alabama, versus South Carolina, versus Oklahoma, at Arkansas, at Kentucky, at Tennessee. Next, you have the 2029 opponents, at Texas versus LSU, versus Missouri, versus Auburn, versus Florida, versus Mississippi State, at Georgia, at Ole Miss, at Vanderbilt. Next, you have Vanderbilt within the Southeastern Conference. For the conference opponents, annual opponents will be Auburn, Mississippi State, and Tennessee. The 2026 opponents will be Tennessee versus Tennessee, at Auburn, at Mississippi State, versus Alabama, versus Arkansas, versus Ole Miss, at Florida, at Georgia, at Kentucky. In 2027, the opponents will be at Tennessee versus Auburn versus Mississippi State versus South Carolina, versus Texas versus Oklahoma, at LSU, at Missouri, and at Texas A&M. The 2028 opponents will be versus Tennessee, at Auburn, at Mississippi State, versus Florida, versus Georgia, versus Kentucky, versus Alabama, at Arkansas, at Ole Miss. The 2029 opponents will be at Tennessee versus Auburn versus Mississippi State versus LSU versus Missouri versus Texas A&M, at South Carolina, at Texas, and at Oklahoma. So there's your Southeastern Conference schedule for 2026 through 2029. Next, I have a story I would like to read with you in the sports world. I'll go ahead and read this. Central Phoenix City claims USA Today flag football national title in final poll of the season. On December 18th, 2025, in flag football, general by David Hallstrad, Red Devils claimed crowned national champs for second year in a row. According to USA Today High School Sports, Montgomery, Central Phoenix City's Lady Red Devils flag football team has done it again. The Red Devils 20-0 were ranked number 1 in the USA Today final rankings of the 2025 girls flag football season Thursday, signifying Coach Mitchell Holt's team as national champions. Central finished 19-0 in 2024 and earned USA Today's first ever national poll #1 final ranking. Central won its third straight Alabama High School Athletic Association flag championship earlier this month at Birmingham's Protective Stadium with a 46-7 victory over Vestavia Hills in the Class 6A through 7A Super 7 Girls State Finals. The Lady Rebels were ranked number 6 in the nation and were riding a 28-game winning streak at the time. Central finished the season extending the Alabama High School Athletic Association's longest flag-winning streak in history to 57 in a row. The Red Devils finished 19-0 in 2024 and 18-0 in 2023. Two players, the USA Today story released Thursday morning continues. It was a highly contested run toward the #1 ranking, though, a three-way battle that also included Hamilton in Chandler, Arizona, and Jacera, San Juan, Capistrano, California. North Arizona, California Powers also took home postseason, blah, blah, blah. Since they won the state championship, they won the national championship. Here are the top 25 that finished for the high school flag football in the United States. Central Phoenix City in Alabama, #1. #2 was Hamilton and Chandler, Arizona. #3 was Jacera Catholic in San Juan Capistrano, California. Mountain Vista, Highland Ranch, Colorado. Maine South, Park Ridge 111, or Park Ridge III, Greenbrier in Evans, Georgia. #6. #7 is Orange Lutheran in California. #8, Whitney Young in Chicago, Illinois. #9, Huntington Beach, California. #10, Red Mountain in Mesa, Arizona. #11, Legend in Parker, Colorado. #12, Vestavia Hills in Alabama. #13, South Anchorage in Alaska. #14, North Oconee, Bogart, Georgia. #15, Willowbrook in Villa Park, Illinois. #16, Dos Pueblos, Goleta, California. #17, St. Anne, Pasali in Columbus, Georgia. #18, Glenbrook South in Glenview, Illinois. #19, Newport Harbor, Newport Beach, California. Arvada West in Colorado. #20, #21, Marana in Tucson, Arizona. Moody in Moody, Alabama. #22, #23, Santa Margarita in Rancho Santa Margarita, California. #24, Southeast Bullock in Brooklet, Georgia. McClathy in Sacramento, California. So there's your top 25 high school flag football rankings. Next, we will discuss a story that is going on within the Alabama High School Athletic Association. The Alabama High School Athletic Association discussing public-private split for championship competition. Let's see. The Alabama High School Athletic Association is considering a proposal to separate public and private schools. Under the potential model, independent schools would compete for their own league or in their own league for postseason play. The discussion follows growing tensions and formal concerns raised by private schools over policies they view as disproportionate. A final decision on the reclassification structure could come as early as their meeting on January 23rd. Let's see. Yeah. They have not announced or confirmed a change to the public-private split, but they are going to meet about it, and it's potentially going to happen as early as January 23rd. Yeah, so we got that going on. Next, we're going to look at some rule changes that are taking place within the National Federation of High School Sports. Actually, we're going to just mention the fact, not necessarily that we're changing, that the rules are changing, but they are changing. There's just a lot of them. Rule changes are going to be taking place in cross country, boys lacrosse, girls lacrosse, track and field, softball, and a couple of other sports, and that will be going on this year in the sports world. Let's see. So, high school basketball is going on, and the playoffs will be starting pretty soon. State championships will be coming up, here shortly, and in that, each state will have their own state championships for playoffs for high school basketball. Excuse me. Here are the dates that I have. In Alabama, the state championships will be March 2nd through 7th. It will be boys and girls, and each of these will be boys and girls unless I mention otherwise. Some of the dates are the same. Some of them are not. In Alaska, the 1A through 2A will be March 11th through 14th of 2026. 3A through 4A will be March 18th through 21st. It'll be that'll be for the boys and the girls. Arizona will have their state championships between February 20th and March 7th. They have divisions in 1A, 2A, 3A, Copper, 4A, 5A, and 6A, Open, and it's with boys and girls. Arkansas, no information is available on their playoffs for their boys and the girls, but their basketball state championship will be in March. California state championships March 13th through 14th, 2026. Colorado will be early to mid-March. Connecticut, mid-March. Washington, D.C. district, no information available, but theirs will be posted soon. Delaware, their state championships are March 4th through 8th. Florida, rural will be February 24th through 27th of 2026. Class 1A through 7A will be March 15th or March 5th through 4th. Georgia, their state championships are March 6th through 14th. Hawaii, the girls basketball will be the 2nd and the 4th. The boys basketball will be the 9th through the 13th. Idaho, March 5th through 7th. Illinois, March 5th through 7th, and that's for the girls. The boys will be March 12th through 14th. In Indiana, the girls' state championships will be February 21st and 28th. The boys will be March 21st and 28th. Iowa, their state championships are March 9th through 13th. Kansas, their state championships in high school basketball are March 12th through 14th. Kentucky, there's no information available, but it is generally held in March. Louisiana, the girls will be March 2nd through 7th, and the boys will be March 9th through 14th of 2026. Maine, there's no specific information available, but it should take place in late February or early March. Maryland, their state championships are March 13th through 14th of 2026. Massachusetts, February 23rd, the start date is still to be determined. Michigan, the postseason is in late February or early March, but no specific date. Minnesota, the girls will be March 11th through 14th, and the boys will be March 24th through 28th. Mississippi will be late February when they have theirs. Let's see. Missouri, Class 1, 2, and 3 will be March 11th through 14th. Class 4, 5, and 6, that will be March 18th through 21st. Montana, Class A, B, and C will be March 11th through 14th. Class AA will be March 12th through 14th. Nebraska, boys and girls will have separate dates when competing, but they're in March, but there's no specifics on dates. But it'll usually be the first and second full weekends in March. Nevada will be February 20th and 21st. New Hampshire, the girls will be March 3rd and then March 9th through 10th. And the boys will be March 9th through 10th and 17th. New Jersey, boys public March 10th through 11th and 14th through 15th. Girls public March 10th through 11th, 14th through 15th. Boys non-public March 12th. Girls non-public also on March 12th. Unified basketball, March 14th through 15th. New Mexico, boys will be March 10th through 14th. The girls will also be March 10th through 14th. New York State, the boys' state championships will be March 19th through 22nd. The girls will also be March 19th through 22nd. North Carolina, the state championships are March 11th through 14th. Let's see, it could be March 11th through 14th and 16th, actually. North Dakota, the girls will be March 5th through 7th, and the boys will be March 12th through 14th. Ohio will be March 19th through 22nd for boys and March 12th through 14th for girls. Oklahoma, no specific dates, but early to mid-March. Oregon, March 4th through 7th, and that's 1A through 3A, 4A through 6A. That's March 11th through 14th. Pennsylvania girls, March 13th through 15th. The boys will be March 20th through 22nd. Excuse me. Rhode Island, no specific on dates, but generally around mid-March, near the third weekend of March. South Carolina, March 5th through 7th, 2026. South Dakota girls, March 12th through 14th. Boys, March 19th through 21st. Tennessee, boys and girls Division II, Class A, AA, March 5th through 7th. Girls Division I, Class 1A through, will be March 11th through 14th. Boys Division I, Class 1A through 4A, March 18th through 21st. Texas girls, March 5th through 7th. Boys, March 12th through 14th. Utah, February 18th through 21st, 23 through 28 for both boys and girls. There'll be a 3-day period during that time frame when, in the time listed, depending on their classification. Vermont has no specific dates, but around mid-March. Virginia, Division II, boys and girls date championship, March 5th through 7th. Division I, girls, March 11th through 14th. Division I, boys, March 18th through 21st of 2025. So, let's see. You have Washington, who will have their boys state championship in basketball March 4th through 7th. The girls will also be March 4th through 7th. West Virginia will have their girls basketball state championship March 10th through 14th. The boys will be March 17th through 21st. Wisconsin, the boys March 19th through 21st. The girls March 12th through 14th. Wyoming, 1A through 2A will be March 5th through 7th. 3A and 4A will be March 12th through 14th. The AISA, or Alabama Independent School Association for Boys and Girls State Championship for basketball will be February 12th through 13th. Schools in Canada also are in Canada, but they follow the National Federation of High School Sports rules, and NFHS is based in the United States. Based on this year's, when I could find regarding state championships in Canada, their state is considered provinces. So for Alberta, that'll be March 19th to 21st, 5 classifications. 1A through 5A is boys and girls. British Columbia, February 25th to 28th. That's the girls. The boys will be March 4th to 7th. Manitoba, March 15th to 23rd. Dates may vary depending on division. The Texas Association of Private and Parochial, February 25th to 28th. Texas Association of Independent Athletic Organization, February 13th to 14th. Saskatchewan, March 26th to 28th. Mid-South Association of Independent School Championship, February 18th through 24th. Georgia Independent School Association, February 25th to 28th. Iowa Girls High School Athletic Union, March 2nd through 7th. All right, we continue with the Sports Palooza. Next, we have the UFL, United Football League, will be returning for the 2026 season. The regular season consists of 8 teams. Some of these teams are rebranding by new name change. Some previous teams will not return for the 2026 season after playing in 2025. There's also new teams added to the mix. Teams not returning include Memphis Showboats, Michigan Panthers, and San Antonio Brahmas. Rebranding teams are as follows: Arlington Renegades to Dallas Renegades, Houston Roughnecks to Houston Gamblers. Returning teams include the that remain unchanged will be the Birmingham Stallions, the DC Defenders, and St. Louis Battlehawks. New teams in the UFL this year are as follows: Columbus Aviators, Louisville Kings, and Orlando Storm. Regular season is March 27th through May 31st. 2026 playoffs will be June 7th through 13th. Each team will play 10 games in regular season. The two teams from each division in UFL and XFL will play conference championship. The winner of those conference championship games will play for the UFL championship. All right, we still got some more to go. Let's see now. Yes, some people consider, they've now considered the, back in the day, they used to have what was called the Negro Leagues, and nothing to be racist there. That's just what they called them and stuff. And now their records have been included as part of Major League Baseball stats. So with that, I thought it would be good to go over some stuff regarding that. There were several teams that played. Most of these teams, at any given time, there were 8 teams that were playing, but some played longer than others, some played less than others. So let's just go over the information I have. In those Negro Leagues, you had the Atlanta Black Crackers with 66 wins, 106 losses, 2 ties, .384 win percentage. They played 3 years in the league, 1932 and then 1938 to 1939. You had the Baltimore Elite Giants. They played 21 years in the league in 1930, 1932 through 1951. 732 wins, 699 losses, 35 ties, .512 win percentage. Birmingham Black Barons, 33 years, 1923 to 1925, 1927 to 1930, 1932, 1937 to 1938, 1940 to 1962. 932 wins, 984 losses, 27 ties, .486 win percentage. You had the Chicago American Giants, 32 years they played, 1920 to 1935, 1937 to 1952, 1,589 wins, 1,311 losses, 51 ties, .598 win percentage. The Cuban X-Giants, no record for years played, but they did go 50 wins, 45 losses, 2 ties, and had a .526 win percentage. Next, you have the Detroit Stars. 15 years they played, 1920 to 1935, or 1931 rather, then 1933, 1937, and they were 655 wins, 561 losses, 5 ties, .515 win percentage. Hillsdale Club, they played 7 years, 1923 to 1927, 1929, 1932. 454 wins, 354 losses, 19 ties, .562 win percentage. The Homestead Grays, 17 years total they played, 1929, 1932 to 1933, 1935 to 1948. 947 wins, 533 losses, 43 ties, .640 win percentage. The Indianapolis ABCs, 12 years played, 1920 to 1926, 1931 to 1933, 1938 to 1939. 556 wins, 616 losses, 31 ties, .475 win percentage. The Indianapolis Clowns, 12 years, 1943 to 1954, 472 wins, 521 losses, 18 ties, .475 win percentage. Next is the Kansas City Monarchs. 37 years they played, 1920 to 1930, 1937 to 1962. 1,553 wins, 951 losses, 26 ties, .620 win percentage. The Memphis Red Sox, 30 years they played, 1924 to 1925, 1927 to 1930, 1932, and then 1937 and 1959. Excuse me. 810 wins, 1,067 losses, 31 ties, .432 win percentage. The Newark Eagles, 16 years they played from 1936 to 1951. 576 wins, 531 losses, 17 ties, .520 win percentage. The New York Black Yankees, 18 years they played, 1931 to 1948. 258 wins, 497 losses, 19 ties, .342 win percentage. The New York Cubans, 14 years they played, 1935 to 1936, 1939 to 1950, 376 wins, 378 losses, 19 ties, .499 win percentage. The Philadelphia Stars, 18 years played, 1933 to 1951, 602 wins, 659 losses, 31 ties, .477 win percentage. The Pittsburgh Crawfords, 8 years played, 1933 to 1940, 336 games won, 268 games lost, 16 ties, .556 win percentage. All right, now let's look at something that I like to call name, image, and likeness. Name, image, and likeness is still a big thing this year regarding college athletics and some high school athletics, where it is allowed. I have a list of athletes and how much value they are worth in NIL. Most of what I will go over is for college athletes, but there are some high school ones as well. Let's get into this. And what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to go over who is, who has the NIL, what the value and what their value is estimated to be. So let's get into this. Again, I told you we was going to have a lot of sports to talk about tonight. We still got sports to talk about. So we have Arch Manning from Texas, $5.3 million. AJ Diantasa, BYU, $4.4 million. Jeremiah Smith, Ohio State, $4.2 million. Carson Beck, Miami and Florida, $3.1 million. Bryce Underwood, Michigan, $3 million. JT Toppins, Texas Tech, $2.9 million. Fernando Mendoza, Indiana, $2.6 million. Lenoris Sellers, South Carolina, $2.6 million. Rayola, no college listed, assume high school, $2.5 million. Julian Sayin, Ohio State, $2.5 million. Diego Pavia, Vanderbilt, $2.5 million. Brendan Swordsby, no college listed, let's just assume high school, $2.4 million. Caleb Downs, Ohio State, $2.4 million. Sam Levitt, no college, assume high school, $2.4 million. Ty Simpson, Alabama, $2.3 million. Dante Moore, Oregon, $2.3 million. Drew Mestmake, no college listed, but assume high school, $2.3 million. Yaxie Lindy Borg, Michigan, $2.3 million. Dylan Stewart, South Carolina, $2.2 million. Marcel Reed, Texas A&M, $2.1 million. Cameron Boozer, Duke, $2.1 million. Jaden Mayava, USC, $2.1 million. Taylon Green, Arkansas, $2.1 million. Josh Hoover, no college listed, assume high school, $2 million. Jaden Quintance, Kentucky, $2 million. Let's see. AJ Lagouvay, no college, assume high school, $2 million. Darian Mensah from Duke, $1.9 million. Jackson Cantwell, University of Miami in Florida, $1.9 million. Bear Priblar, no college listed, assume high school, $1.8 million. Cam Coleman, no information really is available where he played or where he is, but $1.8 million. David Stone, no college info listed, assume high school, $1.7 million. Garrett Nussmeier, LSU, $1.7 million. Jordan Seaton, Colorado, $1.7 million. Jordan Seaton, Colorado, $1.7 million. Caleb Wilson, North Carolina, $1.7 million. PJ Haggerty, Kansas State, $1.7 million. Jared Curtis, Vanderbilt, $1.7 million. Tyron Stokes, not sure where he's from, but $1.7 million. LeBaron Phillum, I'm not sure where he's from, but $1.7 million. Jeremiah Love, Notre Dame, $1.6 million. John Mater, Oklahoma, $1.6 million. Mason Heintzshy, Pittsburgh or Pitt, $1.6 million. Diego Pounds, Ole Miss, $1.6 million. Denzel Aberdeen, Kentucky, $1.6 million. Haynes King, Georgia Tech, $1.6 million. Byron Brown or Browan, no college listed, assume high school, $1.6 million. Ryan Williams, Alabama, $1.6 million. Braden Smith, Purdue, $1.6 million. Carnell Tate, Ohio State, $1.6 million. S.J. Bailey, NC State, $1.6 million. Cade Klubnik, Clemson, $1.5 million. Flaw J. Johnson, LSU, $1.5 million. As of this broadcast, 3 states still have outright ban on name, image, and likeness at high school level. Actually, that's 4 states, and those are Alabama, Mississippi, Illinois, and Hawaii. Not sure if legislation is working on to discuss those. Michigan and Colorado currently have it prohibited, but discussion for possible change is ongoing. Texas allows it for students over 17. All other states, including D.C., in most forms, have it allowed. And, you have to check with your local state to find out what your rules are regarding that. Each state has rules that are different. Now, let's move on to the next thing that we'll talk about in this Sports Palooza. Let's see who we have here. All right, the Max Preps has come up with a list of the high schools for each and every state that is in the top 20. This is the top 50 high schools in all of the United States of America. So, Alabama, it's Clay Chalkville and Pinson. Alaska, it's Soldotna. Arizona is Basha. Arkansas will be Bryant. California is Santa Margarita. Colorado is Cherry Creek. Connecticut is New Canaan. Delaware is Middletown. Florida will be St. Thomas Aquinas. Georgia is Buford. Hawaii is Campbell. Idaho will be Rigby. Illinois will be Chicago Mount Carmel. Indiana is Brownsburg. Iowa will be Xavier. Kansas is Andolly. Kentucky would be Trinity in Louisville. Louisiana will be Edna Carr. Maine is Thornton Academy. Maryland is DeMatha. Massachusetts will be the Xavier Brothers. Michigan is Catholic Central. Minnesota, the best school is Jackson County Central. Mississippi is Gulfport. Missouri will be Platte County. Montana is Frenchtown. Nebraska is Millard South. Nevada is Bishop Gorman. New Hampshire is Bedford. New Jersey will be St. Joseph Regional. New Mexico will be Cleveland. New York is Iona Prep. North Carolina is Grimsley. Let's continue. Let's see what else we have. All right. North Dakota would be Langston, Eadmore, Munich. Ohio is Olentangy, Orange. Oklahoma will be Bixby. Oregon is Lake Oswego. Pennsylvania's best high school is LaSalle College. They have a high school. Rhode Island would be Bishop Hendricken. South Carolina will be Dutch Fork. South Dakota, Sioux Falls Christian. Tennessee would be Baylor and Chattanooga. Texas would be South Oak Cliff. Utah's Corner Canyon. Vermont, Middlebury. Virginia is Maury. Washington State is Archbishop Murphy. West Virginia will be Princeton High School, not the college. Wisconsin is West Des Peres. Let's see, what else do we got? And Wyoming would be Star Valley. So those are the high schools ranked in the top 50, one high school for each state of the United States. So now we have that. So now let's go over the last thing I'm going to talk about today. And basically what I have found the winningest football coaches in high school football. I'm not going to go over their win-loss record, but I'm just going to tell you their names. You have John McCusick, J.T. Curtis, Mike Smith, Robert Hyland, Phil Danaher, Larry Campbell, Jim Roth, Charles Corky Rogers, Philip Haywood. Let's see, Gary Rankin, Bill Castle, George Curry, Jerry Sines, Jim Hightower, C.J. Hamilton, Jack Henzis, John Harrington, Tom Knotts, Larry Bud Wright, Jerry Pizzetti, Dick Tighe, Al Francasa, David Gentry, Randy Allen, G.A. Moore, Bill Hurst, Kurt Blatt, Dave Gutschow. Let's see, Jack Hawley, Alan Chadwick, Dudley Hilton, Jim Render, Ken Leonard, Pete Adkins, Bob Malloy, Robert Paroli, Reno Sakosia, Ricky Black, Jim France, Bob Ladosier, Gordon Wood, Sid Otten, Ron Stolowski, Gary Swanson, Herb Brogan, Willie Varner, Bob Lutz, Ron Holtman. Yeah, we're about finished here, so thank you for staying with me for this time. Let's see. Mike Snyder, Howie Vogitz, Frank Linty, Joe Bradshaw, Torn Mack, Chuck Kyle, Jerry Brewster, Frank McClellan, Ken Netherland, Alton Red Franklin, Bob Shore, Bruce Hendrickson, Warren Wolf, Victor Paternostro, Dick Basham, Mike Boyd, Albert Wright, Terry Malone, Bob Raschek, Bob Sanger. You have Charles Linehan, Carlton Fiat, Dewey Sullivan, Julius Pinky Bob, Dan Pitts, Tom Brown, Buddy Anderson, and Stephen Morton. So, with all of that sports that you've heard me talk about tonight, there's your 2025-2026 Ring in the New Year Sports Palooza presented by Sportslov Media. Thank you for taking the time to hear this broadcast today. I do greatly appreciate each and every one of you. If you will, please hit the like button. Please hit the subscribe button. Please hit the notification bell so you can be made aware when I'm doing these live streams, when I have sports action videos, when I have sports education videos, when I broadcast live, or when I have breaking news in the sports world. If you wish to subscribe to the channel, it is greatly appreciated. You can do so two different ways. You can go to www.youtube.com, the slash symbol, the at symbol, SPORTSLOV, or you can go to Sportslov Media in the search tab on YouTube, type in SPORTSLOV, Media as 2 words. You'll know it's me because I'll have Sportslov Media burned into a basketball as my avatar. I'm also on Twitter X. My handle there is at BobAmin16. That is the at symbol, BOBAMIN 16. From Sportslov Media to your family and anyone else that's watching, Happy New Year. Thank you for tuning in. Let's make 2026 a great year. Thank you for joining me. Sportslov Media signing out. Have a wonderful